Um, does that look good, Laurel?
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, so here's the real quickly. So this is a community science project that we're getting ready to launch. Basically, we're going to have a webinar on April 6th at 6 o'clock Pacific, and it's a collaborative project with the Pacific Crest Trail Association, the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation, and the California Native Plant Society to document basically inventory 5-needle pines along the Pacific Crest Trail. So that's obviously a transect that goes through California, Oregon, and Washington along some of the highest peaks. And there are 5-needle pines along the Pacific Crest Trail. This is a little graphic I cooked up. Limber pines are surprisingly uncommon in California. You can only see them in the transverse ranges in the southern Sierra Nevada. But then we have our near California floristic province endemic, the sugar pine, foxtail pine, which I'm going to talk about today. White bark pines pick up in the southern Sierra and they're north all the way through the range of the Pacific Crest Trail. And then western white pines have a very similar distribution as far as white bark pine. So what are we asking for this project? Well, basically, we're just asking that you're within a half mile of the Pacific Crest Trail. And if you are, and you use iNaturalist and you make an observation of one of these 5 pines, it'll get aggregated into our project. And I can pop the link in for this project. I'll do that real quick here. This is the iNaturalist link for those that use iNaturalist. And we just encourage you to join. Now, obviously, this is a year like none that I have experienced in my 25 years on the Pacific Slope. We have more snow than I've ever seen. The hiking season is going to be greatly delayed this year. But that all being said, there's still ways to get out on the trail, and maybe it doesn't happen until late July or August. But we're thankful for the snow, but this may, of course, delay this project just a bit. So anyway, that's the gist of what I was supposed to do. And then when Laurel said, we don't actually have a presenter, am I still there, Laurel? Are you still seeing the screen? I'm a little...
Yeah, I think it's showing the presenter view, but I can...
It is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see here. What do I want to do? Let me stop sharing real quick and then retry this.
Sorry about that.
All right. It may be because I have 2 screens going. Is it still presenter view?
That's better.
That's better. Okay. Okay. You're seeing the Klamath Foxtail Pine screen, right? Okay.
10-4.
All right, good. I'm going to roll with this. So this is a presentation that I gave for the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation at their High Five conference in 2021. And I forgot it was a timed talk. So it's going to progress through this. But this is a little synopsis of myself. I'm an educator in California. I've taught kindergarten through college. I now live in Humboldt County. I've written some books because I'm so passionate about conifers. I've also started a nonprofit called the Bigfoot Trail Alliance, which is a trail for the trees. It's a way to see 32 conifer species in the Klamath Mountains. And I've just recently published the Klamath Mountains in Natural History. And I'm a board member of the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation. So my favorite tree, the Klamath Mountain Foxtail Pine, it is in the Klamath Mountains, and this is the range of the Klamath Mountains. It's basically mostly in northwest California, but also a little bit in southwest Oregon. And it is truly known as the Klamath Knot. It's a twisting, look at the way those rivers and those mountains twist around. Basically, it's classified by the old rock that are here. And here's a simplified and then more complex geologic map just to give you a sense of this, but it's a high and ultramafic rock, unusual rock type, which is accreted onto the continent due to terrain events and tectonic events. And these complex soils nurture biodiversity of the Klamath Mountains. A lot of that serpentine is home to foxtail pines. They really like that high elevation stuff, particularly in that area of the eastern Klamath Mountains. Those are also the highest mountains. We also have a complex climate regime. And you can see the western part of the range is a rainforest, the southern tip of the Pacific Northwest temperate rainforest. And as you move east, things get a lot drier, but also higher. So I'm kind of highlighting there the high snow forests of the Klamath Mountains. So the orographic effect is strong here. So these are where the sky islands of the Klamath Mountains are. And here's what some of the habitat of those sky islands look like. The ultramafic in the center top is Mount Eddy. That's our highest point in the Klamath. Those are all white bark pine in that picture. There are a few scattered foxtail across that range. This is in the far western Klamath, the highest peak called Preston Peak. I actually wrote the Wikipedia page for this mountain. It's so fascinating to me. But it's the southern range extension of Alaska yellow cedar, Calotropis nucatensis, which is unusual. This is Box Camp Mountain in the Marble Mountains. This is our lowest sky island. It's only 7,000 feet. And there's a lot of mortality in our high five pines up there because there's no more up to go in this spot. We were up there monitoring just last summer for some of that mortality. But this is interesting. So this is the south-facing slope versus the north-facing slope. You'll notice the high five pines on the left side of that mountain. That's the south slope. And then on the, there you go, right there. And then on the north slope is the firs and the hemlocks. So our species really sort themselves out in a different way here in the Klamath Mountains than most of us are used to seeing. Here's that view from Mount Eddy again. These forest patterns, that's where the foxtail pines are, but most of these are white bark pine. This is one of our most extensive, if not the most extensive white bark pine stands in all of the Klamath Mountains, thousands of acres. In the highest elevations of the Trinity Alps, these are on, again, south-facing slopes here on the bottom right. Those are the foxtails and the white bark pines and how they distribute themselves on this higher gabbro, which is, again, part of that ophiolitic sequence of the that comes out of the ocean millions of years ago. So here's the distribution of foxtail and bristlecone from my book, Conifers of the Pacific Slope. But you'll notice that the foxtail pines in California and that group 1 and group 2 are in 2 areas. And this is the area here on the left that I just highlighted that we'll talk about today, but they're also in the southern Sierra Nevada down in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park and a little further south. So here's a zoom in from north to south. The only places foxtail pines grow, that's the Yoloboli Middle Eel down below for D&E, the High Trinity Alps, the Scott Mountains, the Marble Mountains, and then their northern range extension at Lake Peak in the northern. You can actually drive to A. That's one of 2 stands you can drive to in the Klamath. So this is the southern range extension and the coast range. This is on Mount Lynn. And I've highlighted the vegetation communities, but that green and orange that I'm highlighting right there, that's the only place that the foxtails grow. And that orange is the only pure stand. It's about 2 acres. So very limited distribution. This is a species that had a much wider distribution in the Pleistocene, but is retreated up slope and is now trapped on these mountain summits, these sky islands, as we like to call them in the planet. And this area burned pretty extensively in 2020, but this is where the foxtail pines are on Mount Lynn. And the right there is where the pure stand is. That's a pure foxtail pine vegetation alliance. Otherwise, they're mixed in with Jeffrey pine and some Shasta fir, which is Aves magnifica variety shastensis. So fascinating, but this whole area burned, like I said, in 2020, but these stands did just fine in the Yolobolis because of this spatially restricted microsites. This is the other spot on the summit of the Yoloboli. This is North Yoloboli. You'll see these nice open stands of foxtail pine. Some of these trees are quite old, probably up to, not 1,000 years, about 500 to 800 years in the Klamath are the oldest trees that we've documented. I shouldn't say we, that's Eric Knapp mostly that's done that work. And he's looking for older ones. And again, this area burned as well in that 2020 August complex, but only a few of these foxtails were hit. All right, so the Trinity Alps. This is the highest points in basically contiguous points within the Klamath Mountains. Typically 7,500 to almost 9,000 feet. This is mostly granite, but there is some gabbro and other ultramafic outcrops within the gabbro. This gives you a sense of some of the white bark and foxtail pine stands, particularly in this high granite. Notice this is granitic. But in the summer of 2021, we had the highest fire ever recorded within the Klamath Mountains in recent history, and it wiped out a very large percentage of the white bark pine and foxtail pine. You can see how that fire crept up there. And this was above the last glacier in the Klamath Mountains, and the ash flew down on the glacier, and the glacier melted out last year. That's where the glacier was. So we no longer have any glaciers in the Klamath Mountains as of last September. And this is in large part due to obviously the drought, but also that black ash that flew down from this high fire and melted out that glacier at a more rapid rate. So here is, this is more to the eastern part of the Trinity Alps. You'll notice that this is more ultramafic, that red soil, serpentine soil. And it's really, this is where the south-facing slope nurtures these foxtail pines. And you'll notice that over the last 40 or 50 years, there's a lot of recruitment. We're seeing huge recruitment in the Klamath Mountains on south-facing slopes for foxtail pine, probably because of decreased snowpack. But then on that north slope, that granite, that's all firs and hemlocks. This is most likely the world's largest foxtail pine. I have not been in to measure it since I took this picture. I didn't have my measuring tools. But just to give you a sense of how big and how old and how spectacular these trees are within this very limited range. Moving a little further north into the northern parts of the Trinity Alps, this is probably my favorite stand of foxtail pine. A massive growth there where I'm circling on the south-facing slope. The Pacific Crest Trail runs right along that ridge. You'll see Mount Shasta in the distance. Fire moved through here as well in summer 2021, but the foxtail pines did just fine. They small understory burn in a few pockets, but they hung on pretty nicely. All right, so this is moving up into the Scott Mountains. This is also along the Pacific Crest Trail. And this is where Mount Eddy is. This is where our largest stand of foxtail pine is. It's about 600 acres on or close to the summit. I'm sorry, it's 200 acres on or close to the summit of Mount Eddy. But you'll notice this influence of Cercocarpus, the mountain mahogany, curleaf mountain mahogany that's common in the Great Basin, grows with foxtail pine and white bark pine here. So this is really the influence, one area of the Klamath Mountains that gets a heavy influence from the Great Basin. And that mountain in the background is called China Mountain. And this is the view from China Mountain towards Mount Shasta. You'll notice the kind of the windswept diminutive white barks on the summit. There's no foxtail pines in the Cascades, so they're limited by that low elevation between the Klamath and Mount Shasta. They don't get over there. There are white barks there, but it's kind of interesting that Clark's nutcrackers haven't carried the seeds elsewhere than just the Klamath Mountains. Now, obviously, just like everywhere else in the West, five-needle pines are experiencing a decline. This is a decline caused by bark beetle. You'll probably, if you're familiar with this pattern, you'll notice the pockets of kill. There was recent kill. I was up here in 2019 when I took this photo. Maybe it was 2018. Anyway, there was active beetle kill, but it wasn't super extensive, which was nice to see. Up on Mount Eddy, I mentioned it's mostly white bark pine, but we do have a few small pockets of the foxtail pine. Here's a nice view of, this is literally like 200 feet by 200 feet, this stand of trees. It was really weird to find this amongst that sea of white bark pine. And again, that spectacular sweeping view. This is the north facing glacially carved canyon. And all the rest of those little green dots throughout there are white bark. White bark, I've noticed this ecological release here that I'm highlighting where leaders have been shooting up out of the Krumholtz. And I'd love to know if anyone else knows more about that phenomenon, but I've seen it on Mount Shasta and I've seen it in the high elevations of the Klamath here on Mount Eddy. And I'm assuming it's because of decreased snowpack and they're able to kind of shoot that leader up probably over just the last 40 to 100 years or so. This is a picture of the foxtail pines up in the Russian wilderness. The Russian wilderness hold the claim of the most diverse temperate region for conifers on Earth. There's 18 species of conifers in 1 square mile. We call it here the Miracle Mile. And the foxtails and the whitebarks on the granite up high are kind of the crowning jewel of that Miracle Mile. That Miracle Mile did burn. This is 2014, the White's Fire. We lost a few whitebark pine. And this was the first occurrence of whitebark pine mortality that we had in the Klamath Mountains since contact. And obviously now I told you about the story of them in decline in the highest peak of the Klamath Mountains due to the 2021 fire. All right, this is Boulder Peak. This is another high elevation, 8,200 foot peak in the marbles. You'll notice there's a lot of bark beetle mortality on the stand. Thankfully, again, it does not seem to be the entire stand in decline. It's just smaller pockets, some big trees, some smaller trees, a typical pattern that's being seen at least across the areas that I've surveyed, where often the bigger trees die, but yet there's a lot of reproduction and still smaller trees. Here's another picture of that foxtail pine recruitment that is, shockingly common in the Klamath. They're not getting any recruitment in the Sierra Nevada populations of foxtail. This is Marble Mountain. You might recognize, well, actually my video doesn't work, but it's my Zoom background video. I love this stand of trees. All the foxtail pines on the limestone. This is an unusual rock type in the Klamath. Super rare plants up here. Castanea that grows nowhere else on Earth. Fascinating stuff. And then there's these deep pockets, these deep caves within this giant limestone outcrop. This is a view back towards Marble Mountain from Box Camp, which I mentioned earlier. You'll notice the slow decline, and particularly the whitebark pine, but also a few of foxtails. And I've been back since I took this picture. We were back last summer, like I mentioned. So this is our lowest, highest sky island, I guess, 7,200 feet. Hardest place really for, I would imagine, any high five pine to grow. And that's Black Marble Mountain that I'm highlighting there. All right, let's see what's next. This has been a little bit of a whirlwind. Right, so here we go. This is the northern range extension of the foxtail pine on Lake Peak. You can drive here, like I mentioned earlier. One of 2 places you can drive to foxtail pines in the world. One is here and one is down in the southern Sierra Nevada. But they did some fuel treatments in here since I took this picture. See all those fur? They've taken those fur out. They masticated them, and they have hopefully preserved this very small and relictual stand of foxtail pine from potential fire and by fuel reduction. So that was an exciting project implemented by the Klamath National Forest. So a couple of thoughts: increased recruitment of Klamath foxtail pine on south-facing slopes, particularly recently, last 70 years or so. Bark beetles are affecting stands, particularly more xeric areas. Where lodgepole pines are nearby, so we think that the lodgepoles are kind of bringing the bark beetles up into the foxtail and whitebark pine stands. Fire more and more common. Even since I created this presentation in 2021, we've lost a large percentage, and larger than we've ever lost of whitebark in particular. And we still need to keep this active management going, including mechanical thinning. It's going to be necessary to save some of these stands moving forward. I want to thank my mentor. This is John Sawyer. He was professor of ecology and botany at now Cal Poly Humboldt. And I'll just end by plugging my new book that has 34 different authors focused all on the Klamath Mountains. And mine is the plant communities chapter. That was my main chapter. I wrote several others, but the plant communities are really my passion. And I'm kind of excited because we just got some California Fish and Wildlife money to do an extensive mapping of vegetation across the Klamath Mountains. I'll be working with grad students at Cal Poly Humboldt and their professors, and also the California Native Plant Society to make that all happen. So, Laurel, when I volunteered to do this, I forgot that it was a timed presentation, but I just cranked it out in 20 minutes, and hopefully that gave people a nice overview of the Klamath foxtail pines, and I'm always happy to talk about them. So that's why when you said you didn't have a presenter, I could step in and do it. So
Thank you, Michael. That was an impressive turnaround, with a 5 minutes notice.
my
I'm
pleasure.
quite amazed. Yeah, well done. Thank you.
Cool.
Does anyone have questions for Michael? Glenda says, why are foxtail limited in geographic extent? And then also, if you would prefer to ask the question yourself, I can also empower you to do so. So let me.
Sure. Linda, that's a great question. So obviously we have foxtail pines are a California endemic species. They're closely related to bristlecone pines, the Rocky Mountain and the Great Basin bristlecone. They're also related. So this is this subsection Balfourianae within the pines. They're also related to pinyon pines, right? So the thought is about 40 million years ago, this lineage evolved through many climatic changes, obviously. Over that 40 million years, they kind of sorted themselves out. Obviously, the pinions enjoy a little bit lower, drier desert Southwest down into Mexico. And then our foxtail and bristlecone pines are only in the highest elevations, basically, the Great Basin bristlecone, a little bit into Utah, and then Nevada, and then California in the White Mountains. And then we've got the foxtail pines that are only in the Sierra Nevada and the Klamath Mountains. And the belief is that those two subspecies separated about 1 million years ago, and that's based on genetics. So, but yeah, I've always found it to be a little bit mysterious that they're not on Mount Shasta, because the belief, and this is based on some work that Michael Murray did and a few others, but that white bark have actually moved into the Klamath Mountains on a more recent scale, thanks to Clark's nutcrackers. But why haven't they moved over to the Cascades? And my only guess is the Cascades are just depauperate. They're just not that nutrient rich as far as the soils go. It's just volcanic soil, and maybe the foxtail just can't handle that. But the flight for a nutcracker from Mount Eddy, which is where our largest stand of foxtail are, right over to Mount Shasta, would probably take the bird less than 5 minutes. So crazy stuff. They reach Mount Ashland. White bark pine reach into Mount Ashland area, but foxtails don't. So it's just I think it has to do with the soil type. Great question.
Good answer. It looks like David has his hand up. I'm going to allow him to talk.
David, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Sorry, I must have been a misclick.
Oh, he didn't want to. He doesn't have his.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, no worries. Okay. All right. It looks like we do have some other questions though. There's Glenda's. Okay. Jacqueline asks, what measures are folks taking or considering to conserve white bark pine in wilderness along the PCT?
Yeah, good question. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of the initial team funded by Region 5 Forest Service to map the extent of white bark pine in California, and we knew how extensive they were and are in the Sierra Nevada, but we didn't know, and this is, I'm kind of telling this roundabout because somebody else asked the question, why is it important to document the occurrences? I was able to basically, I had free reign. The Forest Service said, we want to know where white bark pine are in Northern California, north of Mount Lassen. And they said, we know that they're only in Mount Lassen in Lassen County. Well, it turned out they were wrong. There was 2 other volcanoes that white bark pine were on in Lassen County. So it became this sort of game of what habitat was above 7,000 feet. Let's hike to the top of these mountains that many people had probably never been to before. It's probably the best job I ever had. And then, are the white bark pines there? And I think the importance of that is because we want to know what we have, right? First, we have to inventory, we have to assess the health, and then we have to look for any changes. So, for instance, Bernie Mountain, which is a lookout just north of Mount Lassen. There's something like 40 white bark pine trees at the top of that. They're all doing pretty well. Bark beetles haven't made it in. So it's just interesting, I think, to think about why things are where they are. What pathogens, what sort of pests and pathogens can have maybe made it there or are disrupting the health of these vegetation communities, often very rare vegetation communities. And what can we do, like they did on Lake Mountain for the foxtail pines, by reducing the fuel load? What can we do to improve the health based on 100 years, 150 years of fire suppression, just for one, or based on climate change for another? So all of these things, I think, are legitimate reasons to kind of reach out and understand a species. But then, how is the health doing? Generally, along the PCT, and this is a very generalized view, but the eastern drier slopes are being affected pretty greatly by bark beetles in the white bark pines in the Sierra Nevada. The foxtail pines in the southern Sierra Nevada, Sequoia Kings Canyon National Parks, are doing just fine, but they're not recruiting. So that's an interesting phenomenon. And then we look in the Klamath Mountains, like I just showed you, the foxtail pines are recruiting. They're getting hit by bark beetles, which they aren't getting hit by in the southern Sierra Nevada yet. So I think all of these patterns start to tell us, what are we doing? What are we doing wrong? I think we know a lot of things we're doing wrong. What are some of the things we can do right to preserve biodiversity? Foxtail, I'll answer Connie's question. I hope this is a Connie Millar, but foxtail pines are being affected by white pine blister rust, yes, but it doesn't seem, in the Klamath Mountains at least, kind of like white bark pine, it doesn't seem to be leading to their mortality directly. Maybe it's branch dieback, the tree is in a slow decline, and then maybe the bark beetles come in. But yes, they are being affected by blister rust.
I think Jacqueline had a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Michael. So you, just to double check, so in your inventories, are you inventorying, presence and absence as well?
Of blister rust?
No, sorry. I'm specifically interested in white bark pine, but any of the 5-needle pines that you've been working on.
Okay, so yes, we are, but basically, so the white bark pine work, that was 2014 to 2018. We did that work. I was basically 100% accurate. Every mountaintop I went to, white bark pine. So it was always present. It was based on elevation. It was pretty easy. Anything above 7,000 feet in the Cascades. And there's a lot of little volcanoes out there by Mount Shasta, but also out in the Warner Mountains. The extent of white bark pine was not understood. And we know that they're at the southern Warner Mountains in the Eagle Cap Wilderness, but not the Eagle Cap. Sorry, that's not right. But whatever the wilderness is in the southern Warners. But in the northern Warners, there's higher plateaus. It's like, averages 7,000 to 8,000 feet. And there's a lot of white bark pine up there that we didn't know about. So yeah, we have all these layers of where they are. And the surveys, this was a rapid assessment, or releve, developed at a California Native Plant Society that we did. And yes, we indicated presence. We were looking for mapping vegetation alliances too with that work.
Cool. And do you know, obviously you've done a lot of work in the California and Northern California area, if other folks are doing similar stuff throughout the range?
I think the answer is, I don't know about Oregon. We feel really good about California. I know a lot of work is being done by David Charlet in Nevada to help map, particularly white bark pine, many of the conifers across those mountain ranges. So that's my best answer.
Thanks.
Thank you. Chris Clark asks, can you touch on what the importance of documenting the exact occurrences or extent of our 5-needle pine populations? On what is the importance of documenting 5-needle pine populations at the local scale? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I tried to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
If these I hike the Continental Divide Trail, right? And I am very familiar with the extent of white bark pine in the Rocky Mountains. Like there are vast, vast landscapes, high elevation, thousands and thousands of acres or whatever. When you get to California and you get outside of the Sierra Nevada, it's way different. Things are extremely isolated. And I just feel, again, I feel like, for the sake of biodiversity, for the persistence of Clark's nutcrackers, for the love of beautiful views, we just need to know where these things are and be able to go back, maybe it's every 5 years to follow up on these assessments.
Gotcha. Thank you. Also, apparently that was Elizabeth Barnes and not Chris Clark.
Okay.
I think her username is just not right up there. John, let's see.
There's a couple of questions about the wilderness area, the Russian wilderness. If you just Google Miracle Mile conifers, you'll find, I'm sure, one of my writings about that amazing place. It's got a cool history. John Sawyer, basically Ledyard Stebbins at Berkeley called Sawyer in the 60s and said, we hear there's some rare conifers up in this place called the Salmon Mountains, which is the name of the mountains. And Sawyer and Dale Thornburg from Cal Poly Humboldt documented the amazing plant diversity up there. And I was lucky enough to get to go in there with Sawyer in about 2013. In the Miracle Mile. They had only found 17 before. So anyway, pretty fun.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I loved seeing all the places that you've been to survey where these foxtails and white bark are hanging out. And it's great that you hiked the Continental Divide Trail too. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Gundy has just said that he's doing some work on Pinus albicollis and the malheur and the strawberries. I've been up in there too. That's a great place. They're definitely in a little bit of decline up there. So good to hear it's happening in Oregon, outside of the Cascades. Cool. Are foxtail pines a masting species and are seedlings being grown for restoration? Foxtail pines are unusual. They almost always have cones. Their cones are persistent. They take, I believe they take a year to mature, and then they just stay on the trees. And it's, in my experience, there's always cones every summer from one season to the next. They're always producing cones. So I don't know that's probably not considered masting. And then, yes, there is some seedling restoration work happening. Klamath National Forest is doing some on their near Happy Camp. They're doing some work, and I'm sure something's happening in the Sierra Nevada, but I don't know the details. I should. And yes, my email, I'll put it in here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if foxtail is masting either. Limber pine produces cones every year, but is still a masting species in that it produces larger quantities of cones like every 2 to 3 years.
My contact is going into the chat, but you can also just Google Michael Kauffmann, and I've got a website. I think I put it in there earlier in the chat. So.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd love to read your book sometime. It looks wonderful, especially if I have the opportunity to go up in that area.
I'll be doing a bunch of work over the next 3 years mapping vegetation. So if anyone's interested, we'll be out quite a bit in some really cool places. So you can touch base. We're looking for volunteers, and it's my favorite mountain range on earth.
Excellent.
Yeah, Glenda,
and if you're interested in a remote sensing component, we should talk.
Yes, and that's part of why we're doing this, is because we're trying to match up some remote sensing that's been done and see if those vegetation communities are what we think they are. The Klamath Mountains are nutty, though. We've got 3,500 plus species of plants. So I think we're going to learn a lot about remote sensing after this project, whether or not it's working and how we can align it better with vegetation types. So, and Glenda posted that the White Bark Pine Ecosystem Foundation does have information on our project on the website. I just updated it before this talk, so there's links that weren't there before. So yeah, check it out under Community Science tab. All right, well, cool. I guess is that it? You're muted, Laurel.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much for being our impromptu guest speaker.
My pleasure. I'll talk about foxtail pines whenever somebody wants me to. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll post the recording of this talk on the YouTube channel. Michael, perhaps let me know what you'd like this talk to be called in an email. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And we'll also be posting Shinasa's talk on the YouTube channel as soon as we get that from her. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
All right. Bye-bye.